Back. Well, last week the census revealed how so many of us South Africans speak different languages at home. Almost 1/4 of our people speak Zulu at home. Large proportions speak Xhosa and Afrikaans. English, the most widely spoken language, the language I'm talking to you in now, but actually the home language of very few people. To put it another way, you may work in English, but you live in your own language. And of course, all of our languages influence each other. They're changing all the time. Finish and Klar. Professor Thabo Ditsele is an associate professor of sociolinguistics at the Tshwane University of Technology. Prof, nice to talk to you again. Good afternoon to you. I mean, it seems pretty easy to define some of our languages now. The census shows that people know which language they're speaking. They know their family's been speaking that language for generations. Will it always be so easy to define our languages?
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you for inviting me to your show. Stephen, my argument regarding the release census is that we shouldn't really be putting more, pay attention to it because it's not really fit for purpose. I know that's not what you're talking about, and the reason why I say this is because Census collects, data on language based on heritage, not on people's lived experiences. So the 8.something% that you see there of English doesn't really represent what people, people's daily lives. It just simply tells you how many people of British descent today say they speak English at home. How many people of Setswana culture identify with the language, even though their lived experience is different.
So, I mean, people will, right now, flick between the channels. They're watching me in English. They'll flick to something else in another language, flick back again a little bit later. I mean, they could come back to you and I in 3 languages' time in the space of 5 minutes, right?
That is why I'm arguing that you cannot collect data or a census on the basis of monolingualism. That is not a true reflection of how we live. I mean, I can communicate in 5, 6 languages. Why would you pin me down to only one language? What do you need that information for? What do you use that data for, other than for immediate gratification of saying this is, my people account for 8.3% of the population, and beyond that, nothing more.
There was a time when languages were sort of defined by geography. So around the world, not just in Southern Africa, people on opposite sides of a big river or a big mountain range might speak different languages. Papua New Guinea had more languages than anywhere else, so did India, because of the geography. Now, and then sometimes people spoke the same language, but their accents were so different they didn't understand each other. That happened in the UK. Things are completely different now since the beginning of spoken word broadcasting. What influence has that had over the last 100 years?
Exactly the point, Stephen. We cannot pretend that, people are in small boxes. People are way above that. I mean, talking about 100 years, we can even go beyond 100 years and look at the type of English that was spoken during William Shakespeare's time. Nobody speaks that language. Nobody sounds like that in the UK. Whichever part of the British Isles you can think of. So to think that our languages will be like this in the coming 100 years, coming 150 years, it's really a sign of being misinformed. They will change. I mean, I have accepted that my great-grandchildren will not sound like me. In fact, if I were to wake up from wherever I shall have been resting, and I speak the type of Setswana that I speak today, they will ask me what language I speak. That's how dynamic language is. That's how fluid language is. And the sooner we accept that the languages as we know them today will not be like this in the next 150 years, we have to make peace with it.
Don't we see this actually when we hear people who are in the senior stage of life? When former President Jacob Zuma speaks Zulu, people talk about, it's a big conversation. Younger people will talk about the kind of isiZulu that he's talking about. Sometimes I think when I hear on YouTube, you can hear, very old voice recordings of people speaking English 50, 60 years ago. There's a sense of authority they have, I think, because they speak a similar English to my parents, for example. I mean, it's interesting to watch how language changes, and people know this, don't they?
Yeah, it's all about nostalgia, Stephen, and nothing else. It's all about what could have been. yes, it's good to be nostalgic about how your great-grandparents sounded, but you'll never sound like them, even if you wanted to. It's a fact of life that you have to accept and then move on.
Are we going to end up in South Africa or Southern Africa with sort of one language or a smaller group of languages? And I suppose some languages spoken by smaller groups of people might be a bit more at risk than others?
Yes, it depends on institutional support. If a language is less supported institutionally, it runs the risk of, being, of dying first. Yes, in the, I know that the Constitution says that all 12 official languages are equal, that story, and it's something that we should support. But on the ground, in reality, we know the pecking order. We know that there's a continuum with English at the top, followed by Afrikaans, followed by Nguni languages, Sotho-Tswana languages, Xitsonga, Tshivenda, and perhaps even sign language at the bottom. We know that hierarchy. And we know, my suspicion or my crystal ball tells me that someday in Southern Africa we're going to have a language that is grounded in English. It's a scary thing to say, but that's where we headed. And why do I say that? The language that dominates generally becomes the matrix or the base language for a new language. The whole record of history shows it. All the creoles that you can think of in the world started with a dominant language that paid bills. So it's no coincidence that if you look at Jamaica, for instance, the pidgin that they speak there, it's not based on languages that were spoken by slaves. It's language, it's English, because they went there to serve people who spoke English. So in South Africa, and with us, it's going to be organic, and we can see it happening right now. If it didn't happen, or if it was not in motion, we wouldn't have people who every September would take a swipe at English and what it represents, only to go back and become, pseudo-English people from the 1st of October.
Does that mean our culture changes too, Professor? I mean,
yes.
It must change, and some of it must stay the same.
Well, some aspects will be stubborn, but others will change. I was talking to my friends the other day, and I said, look at how a Setswana wedding has changed. When I got married in 2001, some of the things that we did then, which were trendy, have been replaced with new ones. So it simply tells you that even when it comes to things like how we bury our deceased, how we marry off our children, things are changing. And not that it's something, like you say, there are certain things that will stay or that will be stubborn and not change within the coming 100 years. But some, as we speak, have started to change. In my culture, I don't propose by, going on one knee, but I see boys, my children's age, do it. It's now becoming part of a new South African culture where you propose the Western way.
We'll have to blame Hollywood, Professor Thabo Ditsele. Thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate the time. Associate Professor of Sociolinguistics at TUT.